Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 12th chapter in the book of Revelation. What we've been doing with these chapters in Revelation is approaching them in the order they come, so we're just going to briefly review what we covered in the video, Corey Johnston, Revelation 11. That the temple, the people worshiping in it, and the altar are measured in the first verse, and there are things that are not measured, those who are outside the temple and its protection. This is the area of the Gentiles in the second verse. Then the third and fourth verse we read, "And I shall give unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clad in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that are standing before the Elohim of the earth." So that number 2 appears twice, and the question why 2 is answered, we feel, in best in Ecclesiastes 4:9 and Amos 3:3. Ecclesiastes says that if you are burdened, that the load is lightened essentially by having a companion. There is strength in 2 that one lacks, no matter what. And so, but we don't know who they are, what their names are going to be, and we'll get to the typologies when we get to it. But they're going to be 2 different voices, different people, perhaps different personalities, we don't know, but they are going to witness to the world for a period that corresponds exactly to the pre-tribulation. So the judgment is about to come when the anti-Messiah rises and rules. For the first 3.5 years, even some, Christians are going to slumber, but then it's all... So 2 olive trees, they are symbols of strength and fruitfulness. Olive trees are mature, they take a while to grow, they grow pretty long, and they bear fruit and oil, which is connected to the anointing and the Spirit. And also, these men are also described as light lampstands, so they are reflective and radiantly reflective witnesses. They seem to prophesy across the earth to the earth, and we'll get to the technological age that we are now in, that John foresees in this vision, because it is a vision. "These have authority to shut the heavens, that no rain falls in the day of their prophets. And they have authority over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they want." So these 2 witnesses, whoever they are, whatever they're named, they are modeled on 2 heroes from the Old Testament, Elijah, who is the prophets, and Moses, who is the law. So Elijah was, in 1 Kings 17:1, he he prays or something. He's informed that there's going to be a 3-year famine and drought, and he held it as long as until wicked King Ahab, did his met his demands. And Moses, this is the blood, the first plague. What is the first thing he did in deliverance of his people when he told Pharaoh, "Let my people go"? He shrugged him off. Moses rose his staff in the Nile and turned it into blood. The Nile was the lifeblood of the Egyptian people. But these aren't literally resurrected Moseses and Elijah's, which I think I may have done that on the first Revelation I did, but that was a while ago. This is more recently. Anyways, and then we read of their death when they have ended their witness. So there is an incomplete. When their task is done, when they have said everything they are called to say, no human power can overpower them on earth. They cast fire from their mouths that swallow their enemies whole at will and by command of them. So they are endowed with great power. But then finally, the beast, that's the anti-Messiah of whom we have yet to read. But and speaking of the chapter we're going to read, it actually makes more sense when connected to the 12th through 13th, but we've been doing them in the order they appear, so we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But therein we read of an evil trinity. So the adversary is an imitator. He's a counterfeit artist, and he, because Elohim exists in Trinity, so too does he. So his Trinity is Satan, the anti-Messiah, and the false prophet. We read of these characters in chapter 13. We meet Satan I think that he's mentioned at least as early as the 2nd chapters. Some of the synagogues of Satan and whatnot. But this is where he is alive and active most. But returning to the death, remember these two prophets died. And some of the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations see their dead bodies for 3.5 days, and do not allow their dead bodies to be placed into tombs. So this is the instant communication mass media world and the technological age that we currently live in. John anticipates this in the business. In his age, he had to write a letter in order to communicate with anyone anywhere, and that there was no instant communication. Someone had to physically bring that letter to another one. He had nothing like the satellite technology we now have, but the whole world is going to witness. We interpret this as that John did have a prophetic vision into the world we now live, and that they're not allowed there to be disgraced and discarded. They're not going to give them the dignity of a proper burial, which was the ultimate disgrace. But the tide's going to turn on them, and the the saints are going to be the ones laughing. And after 3.5 days, a spirit of life from Elohim entered into them, and they stood upon their feet. And great fear fell on those who saw them. So they did not expect this. They thought they killed them, but these are allusions and emblematic of the resurrection to come. And then we read they are raptured. In the 12th verse, they went up in the heavens in a cloud. This is also reminds one of Elijah, who is, with the exception of Enoch, the only human to earn the distinction of going to heaven without ever having died. And and then a great earthquake shatters the city. The second woe is past, and the third woe is coming speedily. Now, the third woe is what we read of here, and in between there's a lot of perpetual praise of the figures in heaven, reminiscent of when John first walked into the heavenly vision room. He meets 24 elders, 4 beasts, and thousands of angels who exist in their entire lives consist of perpetual prayer in perpetuity to the heavenly King in whose presence they are. And the 19th verse reads, "And the temple of Elohim was opened in the heavens, and the ark of his covenant was seen in its temples. And there came to be lightnings, and voices, and thunders, and earthquakes, and great hails." So the temple, remember, in the earliest 2 verses is measured, and this is... Once this is open, the heavens are open in the final verse, then the Ark of his covenant has returned to its place, its proper place in the temple, and then these supernatural calamities, these accelerated abnormal natural activities we are expected to look for in anticipation of the end times is going to come dramatically and suddenly. And that takes us to chapter 12, and the opening verse of which reads, "And a great sign was seen in the heavens, a woman clad with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So a sign is the first word we want to elaborate on. This is an extraordinary spectacle or event which points to something beyond itself, and the beyond itself that this miraculous vision points to is a woman, a queen, who is clad in celestial splendor and surrounded by the same, and she has a crown of 12 stars. We personally interpret this as the 12 tribes of Israel for reasons we're going to explain when we get on verse 5. But she, the woman, is likened to. By some interpretations, there's no consistent one that I'm going to be presenting to you, at least today, but I don't have all the ideas on this book. I balance sources, and there's a range of them interpret the woman as the assembly or church, so and we eventually read she's pregnant in the 2nd verse. "And being pregnant, she cried out in labor, in pain, to give birth." So the language in which it's presented to is suspiciously similar sounding to what Isaiah writes of the New Jerusalem in Isaiah 66 verse 7, and you can also read differently worded something on the concept in Micah 4:10, but the point that's communicated in this passage is that she is a queen and she is giving birth. She is been pregnant and she's ready to burst. She's in the process of giving birth, and the question is, who is this child? And we'll answer to that when we read it. "And another sign was seen in the heavens, and see a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on his heads." So John sees another vision, and eventually these two visions connect, but this is a distinct vision, a distinct event that he is recording and elaborating on. And this is a great fiery red dragon. Who but Satan could that be? Because he has 7 heads and 7 crowns. Satan is a king. His kingdom goes wherever he goes. So wherever that dragon goes with him. A king has to have a kingdom to rule, and it's his own law of governance. But the number 10 is very rare in Scripture. We are often read 4, 3, 7, and 12, each of which have their own numerological significance, and we're not going to dwell on that too much. But the number 10 is a lot. It's a handful. Also, but what we also want to suggest is that they can be representative of the 10 commandments of the Decalogue. So what do we read in the first one? Thou shalt have no other God before thee. And what is Satan trying to do? Getting us away from worshiping him and being with him and fellowshipping with him and joining on his team. And the motivation, as we eventually are going to cover, is not necessity but want and misery. We'll elaborate, save that thought. We're going to save it for later. And his tail draws 1/3 of the stars of the heavens and throw them into the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. So the 1/3 of the stars are the 1/3 of the angels. Angels are superior created beings, but they also have moral agency, the same as us. They are beings and persons. They are exalted in the heavens, and some of these demons are angels disembodied. They're known as demons, and that's a consequence of their joining Lucifer's rebellion, but it was finalized ultimately. If one reads carefully the first 2 verses of the 6th chapter of Genesis, they had physical bodies and they were sexually penetrating many humans in the days before Noah, or right up to them, before the flood. But and earlier in the book of Revelation, somewhere in the heavenly throne room, we read that there's 100 million angels. So you do the math, that means there are 50 million angels. Now they do have heavenly access, or at least Satan does. He's in the throne room of God in Job 1, where he accuses Job, or we'll save that thought for the accuser. We do read more of that in the deceiver and all that. And she bore a male child who was to shepherd all nations with a rod and iron, and her child was caught away to Elohim and to his throne. So this brings us back to the former vision, the first one, and the woman is giving birth to someone who's to shepherd all the nations. So that could be either Yahshua, if the woman was a Jewish queen, who became the Abrahamic fulfillment of blessing all the nations, and all people are blessed through him uniquely and salvifically. But it's also can be represented as the church. We have pastors, and we do play a shepherd's role, but we are not the good shepherd. We're not the chief shepherd. We are shepherds. And rod of iron we also read of in Revelation 19:15. That's when we hear of, or read of rather, of Yahshua Messiah returning with sword in hand to judge all the nations. And then we also read of a wine press in that verse. But for here, the rod of iron does add salience that it is connected to the Messiah, if not the Messiah itself. I just want to leave you interpretive options. We do not know, and one of the reasons we're doing this book is to have catch some progress on, not just this book, but every book as we, take it throughout life. But the child is born, but who is there waiting to devour him? We didn't comment that, devouring the child. Now Satan has been trying to devour humans since Eve. This is nothing new. This battle in the heavens and the earth. Eventually we read that Satan is cast from the heavens to the earth, but he's in the earth now, and he's got his foot in the door. He's trying to kill this woman's child. He is a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So that includes anyone, but especially this child. He knows that there is something something special and strength in this child, and so he wants to kill it as soon as it gets born. Real infanticide. It's just straight out of the room. They get the breath of life, and then it's devoured by a carnivorous predator. But returning, so the child is protected by Elohim into his throne, even though Satan is trying to devour this woman. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by Elohim to be nourished there 1,260 days. So the wilderness is not a dry, barren desert, as we are accustomed to translating in the Bible. Whenever we read the word wilderness, what do we think in our Amero-Anglo world? Wilderness is the jungle, but to the ancient Jews, the wilderness was the desert. But this is not a barren wasteland desert. This is a place of sanctuary and protection of Elohim, whose protection is going to last throughout the tribulation. That's the 1,260 days. And that is, so the woman is giving birth to the church. Satan comes to the earth to inflict harm and persecute all his believers. And there came to be fighting in the heavens. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. So this is a war that takes place in the heavenly throne room, and what happens on heaven usually precedes that which happens on earth. So we are engaged in the same battle, not in the intensity, but the Michael and his angels. So this is entire war of heaven against hell, against the dragon, that's Satan, and his angels, and his angels are demons. We've already clarified that. But Michael, now the prophet Micah's name translates as a question, who is like Yah? And Michael translates as he who is like El. So he is the answer to that question. Most of the prefixes in the Hebrew prophets have either one or two endings, A-H or E-L. Ezekiel, Daniel. We can go on, but you get the point, and that indicates one or two things: the covenant name of the Father, or Elohim, all three. But they were not strong enough, nor was there a place found for them in the heavens any longer. So they are raging, and they are fiercely fighting to protect their access to the heavenly throne room, which Satan does in the book of Job. We read that he is up there in heaven with his angels, and he is telling him he is scouring the earth. That is his territory, and he's doing both right here. But he is finally defeated in heaven, so his doom is certain on earth, because these people are eventually going to come down. But he has been cast to the earth, as we read of in the 9th verse. And the great dragon was thrown out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who leads all the world astray. He was thrown to the earth, and his angels were thrown out with him. So therein we learn of the in the 7th verse we learned of the war. Now we learn of the victory. So Satan struggles. He's angry and active at this time, but at the end of the day, there's not enough strength left in him to triumph. So they are cast from the heavenly. They no longer have access to the heavenly throne room, and he comes to exclusively concentrate his efforts and energies on earth. He's been cast out of heaven. That war is over. Now he's going to wreak his havoc on the earth for 3.5 years. And in the 13th chapter, we read that the anti-Messiah is born out of some satanic stew of sorts. But one of the things we want to warn everyone watching is that the anti-Messiah could be alive at any of our lifetimes. We do not know. There is a child somewhere out there being groomed to this express purpose and function, but it's his process. This satanically endowed man is really a work of his wonder, but not wondrous enough to triumph in the. But the serpent is identified as the devil. That's how he is known in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 and 4. We don't read that word Satan or the devil. What do we read? The serpent. But he's expressly identified as the devil and Satan, so he is both. I guess the devil is what he is, and Satan is who he is. But he does lead all the worlds astray. He is a liar and a deceiver and an accuser. And one of the warning signs we have right now is the great deception. If you turn to Matthew's 24th chapter, somewhere in the 23rd verse or 24th, he speaks of a great deception that will deceive, if possible, the very elect. So Satan is busy at work. There's a deception coming, and it's already here, but it's really going to intensify in the days ahead. It's going to get a lot harder to be a Christian than we have it right now. But he is also he leads all the world astray. That's his mission and ministry, to tempt you to follow his will and his way and his work and his fate and destiny. So he is motivated by misery. He now our salvation, we earlier mentioned, to hold that thought. We just want to pick it up on that. Salvation is not the process of necessity. Elohim does not need us. He didn't need to create us. He is motivated by love, not necessity. So he wanted to have creatures with fellowship with him. Satan is not motivated by need. Nothing's going to happen but by want and desire. So he has an acute awareness that his days are numbered and his time is doomed. We're going to get to that verse when we get to it. So he is throwing all his efforts and all activities on the earth right now, since he has been decisively defeated in heaven. Verse 10, "And I heard a loud voice saying in the heavens, Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our Elohim, and the power of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers, who accused them before our Elohim day and night, has been thrown down." So in the heavenly throne room, he exists. His position is the accuser, and who is our advocate. John, the same author of this, writes in the 2nd chapter of the 1st epistle, which bears his name, opening verse, that it is Yahshua. He is our advocate, and Satan is his opposite. He is an accuser, and he lies and slanders about us. So he is also the liar, and that's what he's doing to Job. He's making a libelous claim that he would forsake his faith if he lost everything at once. He would curse Yahweh to his face, or Elohim to his face. But that was an act of presumption, because Yahweh already knew that the battle was done, but he was going to let him have his way and do his thing with his trusted servant. But what did he do? He accused him, and he ended up wrong. That is the entire reason. The great question of Job is, why would a loving Elohim let this poor man just suffer so much all at once? And the answer is to show his power over Satan, that we can triumph in his power over him too, if we do not forsake him. That's getting a little far outside of ourselves, but we also read of the accuser in Zechariah 3:1. And the vision in which Joshua is exalted to the heavenly throne room. But this isn't quite the heavenly throne room. That's where we began in chapter 4. Now we're on the earth. He sees a woman giving birth on the earth, and these prophets prophesying on the earth in the previous chapter. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their witness, and they did not love their lives to the death. So the enabling ingredient which enables us to overcome is the atonement. This seals and secures our salvation. So it's ultimately, that gives us the power of forgiveness. That's the power of salvation. And the word of our witness, we kind of owe it to him to get out there and proclaim his name. This is our witness. However you do it, wherever you work, even a smile, an authentic smile that shows the Christian joy, can show how fleeting and hollow this and Satan can retreat from that. But loving your life to the death, that means that your life on earth is the thing you treasure most while on earth, but how we live this life has eternal consequences. As what does the Savior say in Matthew 10:39, 16, 24, and Mark 8 and Luke, wherever else, he says that he who loses his life for my sake shall be saved, and he who wants to preserve his life shall forfeit that which he values most in eternity. Because of this, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has little time. So that word little time knows that his time is little. So he doesn't have a short period of time. He's going to concert all his last dying breath to wreaking havoc across the earth and bringing as many people down with him to that dreaded destiny of the lake of fire and an eternity in hell, and not because he needs to, but because he wants to. He is a selfish creature, and that was his original sin, was selfishness. It wasn't envy per se, but selfishness. He wanted something that, belonged to Elohim, and, he wanted to change one word in the Lord's Prayer, mine instead of thine. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown into the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. So his target, his special object, is the target of all his destructive energies is the child giving birth. And this is likened to a reborn church going through the furnace of affliction in the final day of judgment. But Michael is one of the things we also neglected to mention is that in Daniel 12:1, Michael is identified as the protector of Israel. So the protector is also the deliverer of our tribulation. But this woman, that's us. We are the church, and we will be persecuted in severity and extremity for 3.5 years. This must come to pass. It is all part of a wise plan beyond ourselves. And the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle to fly into the wilderness to her place, where she nourished for a time and half from the presence of the serpent. So in the wilderness, remember, that's not a desert wasteland, but a place of sanctuary and learning. So she nourishes this child throughout in the presence of the serpent. So Satan is busy, but in this woman's arm he has that's us, has protection. And out of his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river after the woman, to cause her to be swept away by the river. So the serpent means business, and he is powerful, and all his powers are presently directed at this woman and the child that she carries, and the river. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. So fire, Satan's weapon is fire, and that's where he wants to send us, to the lake of fire. But what quenches fire? Water. Water is a more powerful element just by the fact that fire instantly evaporates in its presence. This demonstrates once more that Satan has no power on earth, even though he is likened to the god of the earth. It's only temporary, so this marks his full and final defeat, or that's what it's leading up to. He's going to torture the life out of the church. The persecution is going to be on, and he's going to do it primarily through 2 human instruments, the chief of which is the anti-Messiah, and his secondary lieutenant is the false prophet. We meet them in the 13th chapter. Probably do that in a week. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to fight with the remnant of her seeds, and keeping the commandments of Yahweh and possessing the witness of Yahshua Messiah. So this dragon, once more, is angry and active. And why is he angry at the church? Because we are doing the work and the will of the Father. But one of the things I want to close with is that every time you do a spiritual exercise or anything else, Satan gets busy. For instance, if you are praying on earth, you are praying to the heavens, and if the adversary is the prince of the air, guess whose territory you are encroaching on? So there is no skull that he delights in more than a born-again believer, and I personally believe a born-again believer can lose their salvation, but we're actually running out of time here. The point of this passage is to keep the commandments. We are to obey at all hazard and health, no matter harm, what life comes, what Caesar decrees. We are to obey and not forsake the witness, even at our head's cost. And that is our Christian duties during the tribulation. So that's not going to be a fun time to be a Christian, but it's ultimately going to winnow the weight from the shaft, and we have to prepare ourselves for this day as if it could come to us, because if we don't at least entertain it in the abstract, we all know that we're willing to live for our faith, but how many of us are willing to die? And that's what it's going to be like in the tribulation. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.